Hello and welcome to Indie Slice, the podcast where I review one indie game each week so that you are better informed about which games are worth your time and money. This is James Moeller, and I am so glad that you're here for episode 76 of the show. I know I haven't mentioned much about coronavirus over the past few episodes, but I want to quickly say that I hope you're staying safe and healthy during this time. Most of us have plenty of games to keep us busy, but that doesn't make the isolation any easier. My hope is that through this show, I can bring you just a few more minutes of entertainment during such a tough time. Let's transition now to this week's game. Today we're going to be talking about Murder by Numbers, which is a mystery visual novel meets Picross game developed by Mediatonic. Mediatonic is a UK-based studio that was started in September of 2005 by David Bailey and Paul Croft. At the time, they were in their final year at Brunel University, and the first game they released was a flash title called Snowman Salvage. Since then, the company has grown significantly and has worked on everything from the Amateur Surgeon series to Fable Fortune to Gears Pop. Murder by Numbers is their latest release that came out in March of 2020 for PC and Switch. It's currently selling for $14.99, and according to howlongtobeat.com, it takes anywhere from 20 to 29 hours to beat. Let's shift our focus now to the narrative. I just don't get it. I've been a co-star on the show for who knows how long, and I'm fired like it's no big deal? What's the problem? The show has been gaining traction over the past season, so firing me seems like rating suicide. There has got to be something more at play. Murder by Numbers is set in 1996 Los Angeles and follows events that take place surrounding Honor Mizrahi. Prior to being fired, she played as a detective on the Murder Miss Terry show, and despite being able to portray an excellent detective on set, she never expected to become a detective in real life, at least not until she met Scout, a friendly robot with amnesia, and found out that the showrunner who just fired her was murdered. From there, the story blossoms and develops over the course of 4 cases. What I absolutely love about this game's narrative is that it feels like a well-written TV drama in the way it's structured. Each case is like an episode that has a clear resolution, while still carrying on certain character and narrative threads into subsequent cases. This allows for levels of narrative complexity that I wasn't originally anticipating. Characters that initially feel like stereotypes grow on you as the game progresses. Larger mysteries like Scout's amnesia haunt you as you search through his corrupted data. And each of Honor's relationships gives a deeper look into how she's been shaped as a person. The writing is clunky from time to time, but for the most part, it does a superb job of pulling you in. Individual cases throw plenty of twists and turns your way. The dynamic between Scout and Honor is heartwarming, and I can't think of a single moment where I didn't want to know what was coming next. In addition, the tone of the game is enchanting. There's an inherent seriousness due to solving murder mysteries, but the tone is still lighthearted and fun because of how the characters are written. I have no problem with dark games in general, but I think Mediatonic chose the best tone for ensuring this game's success. Let's move on now to gameplay. When it comes to gameplay, there are 2 primary systems at work: dialogue choices and Picross puzzles. We're not going to dive too deep into dialogue options because a majority of the conversations are set. You can choose which order to ask questions, but beyond that, true dialogue options are few and far between. The largest point of interaction comes into play with puzzles. If you're unfamiliar with Picross or nonogram puzzles, I'll give you a quick explanation. In a very similar way to Sudoku, these are grid-based deduction puzzles. Let's pretend we're doing an easy 5x5 riddle. Each vertical and horizontal line is going to have a number or series of numbers next to it. What those numbers represent are the amount of squares that need to be filled in that row or column. So if a row has a 5 next to it, you'd fill in all 5 squares. If a row has a 1 and a 3, you'd fill in 1 square, leave the next blank, and then fill in 3. This is a really basic example, but once you've successfully completed a puzzle, the squares become colored to reveal the pixel art picture you were creating. If I completely lost you with that explanation, go ahead and look up a Picross puzzle really quickly, and it should make a lot more sense. Now, what actually prompts these puzzles? This is where Scout comes into play. He's essentially a flying computer from the 90s that has a whole lot of special abilities, including hacking, investigating, and performing lab tests. That being the case, whenever you get a chance to use his abilities during the investigation, you get to engage in a puzzle. The obvious question we need to ask ourselves then is whether or not Picross puzzles fit in a detective game. I believe Mediatonic struck gold with this formula. Not only are Picross puzzles incredibly fun on their own, but they fit perfectly with the theme, and they break up long, uninteractive sections of dialogue with highly cerebral riddles. The combination was perfect because every time I felt myself getting bored with conversations, it would be time for another puzzle. And by the time I finished that puzzle, I would be ready for more dialogue. It was a beautiful flow that never ceased to keep me engaged. On top of those traditional nonogram puzzles, every so often you're presented with hacking sections, which are essentially Picross time trials. Those added just one extra layer of variation to the intensity of the game, which kept me on my toes even more. Although I'm positive about the gameplay as a whole, there are a couple small critiques I want to mention. First off, there are a couple quality of life features lacking. There is no puzzle reset option or undo button. There are hints available, but if you don't want to lose your no hint bonus, there's not an easy way to reset the puzzle or undo your last few actions. This wasn't a deal breaker, but they seemed like unusual features to leave out. Second, as the game progressed further, there was a lack of balance between dialogue and puzzles. I would end up doing 3 or 4 15x15 puzzles in a row before having story to engage with, and that became tedious given the brain-burning nature of the riddles. This balance issue unfortunately slows the game down quite a bit, but I still enjoyed engaging in both elements. Now that we've made it through the narrative and gameplay, let's discuss the art and sound design. On the art side, Murder by Numbers uses a comic book style of illustration with characters that are meant to look like they're cut out of paper. If that sounds confusing, it plays out a bit like old flannel graphs. The backdrops are stationary while the character models move and react with the dialogue. I think Mediatonic made a great choice with the art style. For a game that's part visual novel, it feels dynamic, and the character designs in particular are charming and fit the settings wonderfully. When it comes to the sound design, there's no voiceover, but there is a killer soundtrack by Masakazu Sugimori. He's created music for a whole lot of games, including Breath of Fire 4, Beautiful Joe, and most notably, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. The soundtrack for Murder by Numbers does such a great job of portraying the seriousness of the situation while still capturing the eagerness and positivity of Honor and Scout. The songs are also perfect for solving puzzles. They're motivating without being distracting. Now that we've talked about the narrative, gameplay, art and sound design, let's summarize with some positives and negatives. First off, on the positive side, Mediatonic made clever decisions regarding the story format. They also supported those decisions with compelling characters and intriguing cases. Second, the infusion of Picross puzzles into the narrative experience creates a game that never gets stale. The ebb and flow between the two is an absolute delight. Third, the art and sound design support and enhance the lighthearted tone of the game. First off, on the negative side, given that Picross puzzles aren't anything new, the lack of some key quality of life features is disappointing. Second, as puzzles ramp up in difficulty, the game's pacing starts to falter. We've made it now to the final boss. This is the part of the podcast where I let you know whether you should slay the game and buy it, flee the game and avoid it, or farm up and wait for a sale. My verdict for Murder by Numbers is to slay this game. I had such a joy every time I booted this game up, so as long as you don't have any deep-seated hate for logic puzzles, I think you'll feel the same way. This game has a riveting story, rewarding puzzles, and a positive tone. As always, thank you all so much for taking the time to listen in. If you enjoy the show, I'd love it if you told a friend and gave the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you want to find me on social media, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at indieslicepod and via email at indieslicepod@gmail.com. I hope you have a safe and wonderful rest of your quarantine, and I'll see you in game.